Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. You probably know, but if not, this is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and journalists and writers and editors and all people who put things out in the Bronx. In our second segment this evening, we're going to talk to an artist who has put together art and the environment in the Bronx, which is really something exciting and different that you're going to enjoy. But to get started, we're going to go right to a core issue in the borough of the Bronx. And we're going to say good evening to Reema Amin, who is a reporter at Chalkbeat, which is without a doubt the premier education paper, if you will, in the city of New York. Nice to meet you and nice to see you, Reema, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's just let people meet who you are, so when they read everything in Chalkbeat, they can say, "Oh, I know who Reema is." How did you get into journalism? How did you, and then find your way to educational journalism at Chalkbeat?
Sure. So I became a journalist full time about 10 years ago. I'm actually originally from the Chicago suburbs, and I was a
Aha!
reporter. Yeah, and I was a reporter. I was a breaking news reporter in Chicago for a few years before I moved to Virginia, near like the Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Newport News area, if folks are familiar with that, where I did some local government reporting. And in the course of that, over those 3 years, I became very interested in education reporting, and always sort of had been, even earlier in my career. And so, and I knew what Chalkbeat was, so I
And what
applied.
better place to do it at the premier publication, education publication, right? Is that where
Oh,
we're at?
sure. I mean, yeah. And then this job became available, covering the nation's largest school system for Chalkbeat. And so applied. I was lucky enough to get the job. And
And here we are.
actually, yeah. And I've been here for 4 years.
I want to make a snarky Bronx comment, and that is, so you went from the second city to what is known as the first city and the largest public
Oh,
school system. That was bad, right?
look, I'm a
that was not
professional, so I
necessary.
won't even say anything.
All
I'll let you
right, that
have
was
that
not
one.
necessary. All right, but what is it about reporting on education that inspires you?
I think that a lot of people say this, but it's so true that education is not just a silo. It intersects with housing policy. It intersects with food insecurity. Um, you know, Looking at the demographics of education. Where kids are going to school, who is performing better academically on state tests. It's just
And why? And
and
why
and
is it?
why? I mean, it
Yeah.
just intersects with so many different facets of government and society, and I find that fascinating, and it's also the first sort of entry point into it's the
It's
first sort of public
everything.
service that children experience in their lives,
Well,
really,
I
so.
can tell you, and then we're going to get into some real hardcore issues, educational issues, if you will. When we started my other TV show, Bronx Talk, here on BronxNet 28 years ago, the very first show we did was education. We had the Bronx representative on the Board of Ed who had just been appointed way back when we had the old Board of Education, and we did that deliberately because we felt it was just the foundation for everything. So let's roll up our sleeves here. Um, and it's too crazy to talk about, is the school budget. So a budget was passed. The state legislature passed a very strong budget. Then the city was ready to spend less money because they said they had less students. Then the courts got involved. Where are we at? You've written about it. Let's talk about all the machinations of the budget. And do you think, with the resources we have available, the budget is sufficient? I mean, and is this process a mess? I don't even know where to begin. You got to solve it for me.
Yeah. Well, I can try to get at what the issue is. So, like you said, City Council passed a budget in the summer for this current fiscal year that included what the comptroller has amounted to about 370 million dollars in cuts for money that goes directly to schools. So if you think about your local school, that's the money that they have on hand, particularly from a pool of fund that schools use to hire teachers or create enrichment programs. And the city said that they needed to do this because they have projected enrollment to decline again this year. And enrollment has been declining for a while, but it dropped pretty dramatically over the course of the pandemic. In turn, I think most people would think, well, if you have fewer students, then you need fewer teachers. But it
and
is
and less money. Yeah,
and less
logic would
money. And
dictate that. Yeah.
right, but it is actually far more complicated than that. That means it's going to result likely in larger class sizes, which we've heard from school leaders and teachers on the ground, because you can't afford to keep, all your teachers around.
It
And
would be nice. Let me just interject my own
yeah,
editorial point. It would be nice if the money was there and we had fewer students. You said, well, that's okay. Let's spread that same money around, and so the schools could do better. Maybe make the classes sizes smaller. Maybe have an extra teacher to teach art. God forbid they should teach art or music or something like that. I mean, so that's my editorial comment. It would have been nice to just do that, but that didn't happen.
well, so this is actually an argument that advocates who have pushed back pretty forcefully against budget
Yep.
cuts have been making. And this is a little complicated, but the city basically using these federal COVID stimulus dollars that folks probably have heard about in the previous administration, de Blasio sort of held schools harmless, as they say, because enrollment was dropping, and the school funding formula is based on essentially, how many students attend, including other factors. But they use some of this relief money to hold schools harmless and not cut their budgets. And this year, the Adams administration is doing a little bit of that, but they're not fully holding them harmless, hence the cuts that we're seeing. And the Adams administration has argued, we could hold schools harmless, but we are expecting enrollment to continue to drop. And we don't want, a few years from now when this federal money runs out, we don't want schools to suddenly be hit with this enormous cut without sort of
So
gradually,
he's
softening the blow a little bit.
easing his way into it. Well, now
Right.
I'm gonna throw a wrinkle into it, and on Bronx Talk, as I mentioned to you last week, we talked to some principals. They're talking about now. Well, wait a minute. We have an influx of these migrants who have come in, and not only are they more students, but many of them need some sort of special care, at minimum language care, and so that requires, if they can manage it, an extra ESL teacher or run some extra classes, etc. Have you noticed, have you talked to educators who are saying, you know what, the influx of migrants has affected our school, and now, as opposed to Mayor Adams saying we're going to get fewer students, all of a sudden, now we've got to have more students.
Yeah, so we don't have quite a sense just yet. It's
Yeah.
still early in the school year of how schools are totally grappling with this. There was a story in the New York Post that focused on one Manhattan elementary school, I believe, um, that really was sort of, the phrase putting out fires, because many of these asylum seeking students had enrolled particularly in that school. And so they were sort of trying to get these extra services. And as you noted, many of these students, if not all of them, will be learning English as a second language. And those students are legally mandated to have
Of
extra
course.
language support. And some of them might also be students with disabilities, which means that they need bilingual services, specifically bilingual educators who can also educate students with disabilities, which is a huge shortage area for teachers. And so it's sort of these complicated interlocking issues that schools are having to deal with. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are other schools that are grappling with sort of how to figure this
Yeah.
out, especially after they've planned for the school year. And I should say that we've asked the DOE, the Department of Education, about this. Like, what if your school with a huge budget cut, but you have these students coming in? They've said that in that case, the DOE can essentially dole out sort of like emergency funding
So
to help them meet
provide
those
more.
mandates.
But you know what? We've done so many programs on this and had dialogues on this. You bring these kids in, and okay, so you give them language help or whatever, but they've come from another culture, from another country. There may be significant trauma that they've been through even to get here. That is going to require a whole other look at their mental health, at their social health. Are they going to be able to interact? And I will tell you this, and then we'll just do one other quick topic. I heard the parent advocate we had on our other program on Bronx Talk talked about how because so many of these children need to get ESL help, the children who are normally in ESL are kind of not getting the attention they need. And that, of course, creates resentment between parents. It's just unfortunate. I wanted to ask you something else about something you have written about, and that is the dialogue over, I didn't mention this earlier too, dialogue over mayoral control. And I saw a couple of social media posts where people in the Bronx were, debating the whole notion. We don't want the mayor to control. My point of view, and I'm curious what you think, I'd like to see a different plan. In other words, it's very easy to say no more mayoral control. We don't like Mayor Adams or Mayor de Blasio or that system, but I'm waiting to hear about a system that will not turn us back into the old Board of Ed and districts that were out of control and corrupt and everything else. So what is your thought? We got about a minute and a half to do it. What is your thought about the whole mayoral control debate?
Yeah, so this year, the state legislature extended. By the way, mayoral control is controlled at or rather, legislated at the state level, and it was
That's
extended.
true.
It was extended for another 2 years under the Adams administration. And what was interesting, what I will say about this debate is that, the state legislature made some tweaks to allow some more parent voice on the panel for educational policy, which is essentially the mayorally controlled school board almost that's legally
Right.
supposed to pass things. But really, it's sort of been viewed as this rubber stamp. And what I will say is that while this debate is as old as time, it seems that there's more growing appetite for a system that's different, just like you mentioned.
Yeah,
And
although
the fact that
I want answers, and we don't have answers yet to
we don't
that
have
question.
answers yet. I do think, though, in 2 years, it will be interesting to see if the state legislature, wants to do a complete overhaul.
Part of that will be how well the schools do. I mean, in other words, if people feel that the
Yeah.
schools are efficient, the way
Which
you
can be
reacted.
defined in many different ways, I should
Yeah,
say.
right.
But yeah.
Listen, you want to give us a hint of what you're working on next, or we don't?
You know what? We
We
are
only got
gonna
about
be
30
working on
seconds.
lots of things. State test
Okay.
scores is news that you've seen this week. The state budget. There's so many things happening
So
this
many
school
things.
year.
Listen, Chalkbeat is lucky to have you. You're great. We could see it. We love it. The information you bring us is vital. And
That's
what
really
you're writing
kind.
in Chalkbeat, we want to just tell everybody, especially if you have kids in school, you really want to know what's going on. Go online, look for Chalkbeat. What is it? Chalkbeat.com? .org.
Chalkbeat.org.
.org, chalkbeatnewyork.org, and look for Reema Amin and her great work. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. We're going to take a very short break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to go to Wave Hill with an artist who has done something about the environment that you're going to want to know about. We'll be right back. Hey there, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. I am very excited about this segment. because partially she's my neighbor. That's another story. But Maya Ciarrochi is a wonderful artist, and she has something wonderful that is happening actually right now at Wave Hill, and it will continue through December. Hi, neighbor. How are you, Maya?
Hello, nice to see you, Gary.
Nice to see you. Maya is a wonderful artist, a creative person, somebody who thinks outside the box, and you are going to see the results of that. Maya, before we even get into the Wave Hill thing, just a little bit about your background. You've been an artist all your life. It's been something, it's a hobby. Just a little bit about you so people can know where we're coming from.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I am a interdisciplinary artist. So I work in a lot of different mediums and disciplines. So it could be painting, drawing, printmaking, and also things like video and performance. So currently,
And you've been doing this all this time, like even since you
so
were a
my
child?
this I'm sort of on my third career. I my
But
background
who's
is
counting?
But who's counting? So I started as a youngster in studying ballet and modern dance, and I had a career as a professional dancer, working in different companies in New York and nationally. And then in the mid 2000s, I went to grad school for computer art and video, actually. And I got really excited about interactive performance environments. And so that's the thing I wanted to do. And then I ended up making projections for dance and theater, and then
Oh.
more like regional theater and off Broadway, Broadway theater.
It
Uh,
sounds like you have a mind that can't stop. So you've done this, and now that you got to say, what am I going to do with this? And then I got to do the next thing, right?
it's a short life, right? We're only here
And you're
once
making
around
the
the
most
sun.
of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to understand before we even get into looking at the exhibit. What is the cyanotype, which cyanotype, is that what it is?
Cyanotype. Yeah.
Cyanotype process that I understand because you told me that you
Mhm.
do actually in that apartment that's not too far from where I live.
Yes, so I actually have a studio, but I make cyanotypes in the apartment because I have good access to water, which is a necessity when making cyanotypes. So cyanotypes are one of the oldest photographic processes. The first sort of known book of cyanotypes was by a woman named Anna Atkins in 1843. It's a process and it was done primarily to document botanical specimens like flowers,
Oh,
plants. She documented algae and seaweed. And so you create a photogram. So what happens is you treat paper with iron salts, which is it can actually be paper or any other kind of material. You have to coat the paper with a mixture of two different kinds of iron salts, and then the objects are placed on the paper, so plants or flowers, and then
wow.
or transparency.
And so this is the blend, frankly, and that what makes it so great and perfect for Wave Hill of nature and art. And so now tell us what you have done. I know Anderson has some looks at what the gallery looks like at Wave Hill, but Maya, why don't you tell us what it is that we're going to look at?
Sure. So this is a project centered on what we now call Tibbetts Brook, which is, for those of us who lived in the Northwest Bronx, we know a lot about Tibbetts Brook because it is a buried stream that flows into the sewers under Broadway, but it used to be above ground. It wasn't a major waterway, but it was an important waterway to the Muncie Lenape who lived in this area, and it flowed into what was called Spite and Dabble Creek or Muscoda, which has been filled in when the Harlem Ship Canal was created.
That's right,
So
and I'm going to move that forward, and then there is
yes,
a railroad that owned the property beforehand. People at BCEQ and the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance are trying to recapture. They're calling it a daylight process. So you have basically represented, inspired by all of the above, by the cyanotype, by your background, and saying, well, now we've got to do the next step, and then also by this incredible opportunity to change our local world. That's where we're at, right?
Right, and I'm looking at it through slices of time. So when you go to the exhibition, you'll see they're all maps, which I redrew.
Anderson, let's just start putting some of those up there.
Yeah,
Okay. So go ahead.
yeah. So this is one from like the Revolutionary War era. I redrew the maps, so they have sort of mark making. That's my own hand. And then I transfer them as a transparency and then print them in the cyanotype process. So
And
here's what Spite and Dival Creek looked like before it was filled in. So you can
and
kind of see these slices of time that sort of take you through the urbanization of the area.
did you spend time looking at at old maps? I mean, and how do we? Not that I'm saying that you didn't do it realistically.
Mhm.
How do we know, and how do you know that this is an accurate representation of it?
Well, that's the whole thing, right? It's the hand of the cartographer. So, is it actual? I mean, that's the slippage. So we're looking at a at landscape through the sort of the lens of the person who drew the map, and then you're looking at through my lens because I have maybe removed some names. Maybe it's my drawing. My hand is a little wiggly, so it's not straight lines. So
So it is artwork, of course.
it is art.
That's
It's a
what
translation.
In terms of that project, which is a very exciting project that people don't know, as you might know, that the Major Deegan was flooded. What was it? Hurricane? I forget, lose track of them.
Ida.
Hurricane
Mhm.
Ida. And then part of the hope is that if they do this daylighting, it will give the water some place to go, and we will avoid that sort of thing in the future. Do you believe that your work kind of enhances it, reflects it, helps people understand it? In other words, from the artist's point of view, what are you hoping that people like me and others who look at it get out of it?
So I really I'm quite interested in like the things that are right under our feet that we forget about. So
Ah,
just a kind of consciousness awareness that there are all kinds of buried histories just under our feet. So water is usually a major one, especially in New York City and other urban centers, because the sort of 20th century approach to control of water, which is to just send it underground and sort of make it hidden. So yeah, I'm really interested in buried histories and kind of like from an archaeological sense.
hmm.
So and also people really love looking at old maps and sort of saying like, oh, that's where I live, or and look how different it looked
Hmm.
then.
So, Anderson, put up another one. Let's just see. And Maya, you can identify. So this is Manhattan Island.
This is Manhattan, and you can see this is also a from Revolutionary War era, so it has a very different shape. It's like very curvy and much more organically shaped. And over time, everything got to the lines got straightened and made it
Right.
primarily for ships to kind of navigate the waters.
Wow. Fascinating. Do you see now? What's been the response of people, let's say, who have come in and seen the exhibit so far? I mean, I just understand, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of the serendipity between the fact that it's art and nature. You said that this type of artwork was created for botany, that it just makes sense to be, well, where else in the Bronx? I guess you could do it at the Botanical Garden, but Wave Hill, which is, an artist's, like a museum, it's like perfect. I'm sorry, I'm going
Yeah,
on,
no,
but
totally. In fact, I started the work when I was at a residency at Wave Hill, actually in 2020, right before the
ah,
lockdown. So this is sort of carrying forward from that time, and I was really inspired by the place. And the cyanotype process is also very tactile and physical. You really get in touch with the paper and sun, and because you expose to the sun, and then you have to wash the paper out by hand. So it really connects you to land and sun and water elements, all those kinds of things. But I also love this is a really local project. This is like really about the place where we live. And one of the things that I have in the show is a little box where you can write on a card your dreams for water where you live.
oh, I
And you
like
put
that
it
a
in the
lot.
box, and then I take the cards and I take all the text and publish them on my website.
Mhm.
And there was a very small piece in the show that has people's dreams for water printed as a cyanotype.
Wow. Then we're
So
gonna have you come back and read some of them. How about that?
yeah, I would love that
That would
actually,
be
because
great.
it's poetry.
Which,
Yep.
of course, now I think there may be one more that we can show. So Anderson, why don't you pop that one up, if I've got my coordination right. So
Oh,
this
this
is
was
a
a nice
radial
one.
design of streets, right?
This is actually the
Oh, I'm wrong.
Spite and Dival
Oh,
Creek,
sorry.
when that was I'm sorry, the creation of the ship canal, actually.
All right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now here, what you had just said leads us perfectly into what is coming up, and that is the fact that not only will people be able to interact and write something down, but they will be able to talk with you. And I'm interested in that because it gives you the opportunity to directly explain not only the artwork, but the relationship between what you have done and I guess what your hopes are for this exciting project. Right?
Yes, on October 15th, folks are invited for an artist talk in person at Wave Hill. It's Saturday, October 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. You can register on the website. It is free with admissions to the grounds.
On the Wave Hill website?
Yes, exactly, the Wave Hill
Right,
website. And
wavehill.org.
taking place in the Wave Hill house, which is where the cafe is. So you can
As
come
you
to
can
the
see
talk.
in those photographs, yeah.
Yeah, you can come to the
So it's
talk, and then you can
October
have.
15th, 1 to 2 p.m. You should register ahead of time, did you say?
You don't have to, but it's
But
recommended.
it helps. It
Yeah.
always helps. To me, you want to come and number one, learn about this project, which is going to affect us all, really. I mean, think of how many people use the Major Deegan, but it's going to change kind of the landscape of that whole area that is, I guess, on the southbound side of the Major Deegan in the 230s as they get into the 220s. God willing, it'll look wholly different. And you bring your questions, you can ask Maya about that. Do you? This is the stupidest question of the day. Do you have plans for other things that you're going to do? And the reason is because I know the wheels are turning. So what's next? What do you got?
Oh, well, what's next is I'm actually unrelated to this project. I'm going to Vancouver for an exhibition and actually a performance of another project I have called Site Yiskor, which is also
Called
about
what is it?
Site Yiskor. It's about memorial and remembrance, and it's music and dance and visual art. We just performed it. My team, we performed it in Poland in June.
Isn't that wonderful?
So we're going to Vancouver in November to do it.
Wow. All right. Listen, Maya Ciarrochi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your great work. Thank you for enhancing our artistic boundaries and also for illuminating what I think is one of the most important environmental projects to come down in the borough of the Bronx in a long time. So
thank
we
you,
appreciate
Gary.
it. Wave Hill, check it out. You can see the exhibit till December, and October 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. is the artist talk. I'll see you around town, Maya.
Bye, Gary. Thank you.
All right. That's it. We're going to have to say goodnight. We'll see you next week. That's what we do. Good night.